Welcome into the vault. It is Monday, June 19th, and now that minicamp is in the rearview mirror, we decided that, as we discussed last week, we'd review it all in detail and get into all of that coming up over the course of the next however many minutes we go on this Sunday night as we record and get ready for, again, a fresh new week coming off of mandatory minicamp. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Oakley. As always, I'm Bobby Trossett, joined by my co-host and partner, Sarah Ellison. And, Sarah, we left off last week with an awesome interview with Ian Rappaport. It was great to have a chance to catch up with him and make his, he made his debut on the vault, and we had our fun, and we talked about J.K. Dobbins. And I wasn't sure personally whether or not the Dobbins story had enough legs to kind of carry us into this week. Well, it certainly has, and there's a lot to sort of unpack, and I think that's probably where we should begin right off the top.
Yeah, well, I think that when we were talking about it with Ian Rappaport, at that point, Dobbins hadn't spoken with WJZ's Mark Viviano. And so I think that's kind of where the update is, because we really hadn't heard from JK since those tweets. And so when he was with Mark, he was still vague, but at least we had heard from him.
I should probably go about this chronologically, right? So we'll begin with, because we did not play this last week on the vault, so we'll do it now. And that's John Harbaugh's response to JK not being a participant in last week's mandatory minicamp.
I really don't. I expected JK to practice, and it wasn't in the cards apparently, so we'll just get ready for training camp.
So I think we mentioned it last week, but we hadn't heard the sound yet. And we both agreed that looked like mid-season Harbs when or that sounded like, right? And it looked like it too. Trust me, having watched the press conference, it looked and sounded like mid-season Harbs when asked about injuries. Clearly he was bothered by something at that point. Yeah,
I feel like usually June Harbs is much more open about stuff. So, and just putting the word apparently in there is, I guess that's the way it is or whatever. So nothing to stress over, I don't think, in June or whatever. But I think it's pretty clear Harbs, was hoping he would practice, and JK did not. He was there, but he did not. And that was when you had asked Ian Rappaport, so can we officially call this a hold-in? Ian, of course, is also talking to agents and other sources, and he was like, yeah, I think we can say it's a hold-in.
Yeah, and let's cut to that. Just in case you've been in sort of summer mode, you haven't checked out episode number 299 in the archives. By the way, all of a sudden, partner, you look up, we've done 300 episodes, and we're coming up on 1 year of existence. So that's pretty cool. We appreciate everybody for their support, of course, as always. But if you haven't checked out our conversation with Ian yet, you can go into the archives. But for now, here's what he had to say when I was asking him about JK.
Yeah, I mean, that is what it sounds like. I don't know for 100% sure, but usually when a player shows up, doesn't practice, the coaching staff is like, he's fine, and he's going into a contract year. Usually that means, well, I'd like a deal, but I don't have one, so therefore I'm not gonna participate. To me, these are all fine. These are all, they don't really hurt anyone. There's really not a lot bad happens. He doesn't get practice, but it's June. So he'll have plenty of time to practice in July and August. Plus, this is his fourth year in the system. So I'm not worried about it. Or actually, fourth year with the Ravens, first year in the system. But I'm still not worried about it. He's got plenty of time. Clearly wants a new deal. Will they give him one? I don't know. But clearly wants one. And yeah, I think hold-in is probably the right term here.
And remember, too, we're just a couple weeks removed from the cryptic tweets essentially expressing his uncertainty going into the final year of his rookie deal, Sarah. But that gets us to WJZ's interview and our friend Mark Viviano, who sat down with JK recently. Again, it was the week of JK in the news cycle. It ended with just a snippet here. It ended with an interview, but we have a snippet from that WJZ interview with JK. They're going back and forth essentially about, why he didn't participate in mandatory minicamp and what it really was about. Listen to this.
The thing I can say is I would love to be a Baltimore Raven for the rest of my career. I would love to, because I love the city. I love the people. It feels like family here. Like, it feels like home here, my second home, and I hope that happens. I hope that happens.
You're a football player, but you have wide-ranging interests and abilities. And in many ways, you have to be a businessman. Mm-hmm. Do you like the business side of what you do, or is it hard?
The business side is very hard. It's very different. It's different. But it's part of it. It's part of the dream, and it's something that I'm blessed with, to deal with the business side of that. You saw with Lamar, it's never just roses and daisies. It can be hard at times, and it's business though. So it's part of the dream though.
Yeah.
So again, that was just a small snippet from that conversation with WJZ. And Sarah, that there's more meat left on that bone that we didn't play for you. So, some folks may have to go back and get that context just for the entire interview itself. But what was your takeaway from what we just heard, also knowing that we've both listened to the entire thing as well?
My take hasn't changed. It's he wants a new contract. And there is some ambiguity, like I read the latest from Jeff Zrebiec from The Athletic. Jeff was the first person to put it out that J.K., that he was told that J.K. was protecting his knee or whatever. And in the latest, even after this WJZ interview, Zrebiec said that his source still insists that there's something, going on. I can't remember if it was a knee or a soft tissue, but basically that they were his source was attributing that there really is something health-wise that's wrong. But even Jeff was like, look, even if you put that, what my source is telling me, you put that with what John Harbaugh said, you put that with what J.K. Dobbins tweeted, and then you put what J.K. said with Mark, that the business is super hard. Like, we don't need to be a rocket science to see that the two sides in this moment are not on the same page with the contract. But listen, while this is JK's first time going through it for himself, and so you have some, compassion there that this is crazy when it's actually you, it's another round of this. This is where Eric DeCosta lives. We just did this with Lamar Jackson. And when JK is settled, it's going to be another person. We've seen people ask for trades. We've gone through Marquise Brown. We've gone through, Hayden Hurst asking for trades. It's just another round. And so, I just don't see that it's anything to be nervous about. I can't see a world where this quote unquote hold in continues to a point that it's like he's not playing this season. In June, you can do this. Even Ian told us it's not really about leverage. It's just about showing with your actions more than your words that you want a contract. And then he's also protecting himself, right? There's no reason to open himself up to injury during minicamp. We've heard about what happened to Chuck Clark. We've seen other people at the Ravens get injured during mandatory minicamp. Like, freak accidents can happen even when you're not hitting. So I have no problem with protecting himself as he's trying to get a new contract. But like Ian said, there's really no leverage there. So we can implement these tactics right now. But in the end, if they're not on the same page, given how the league views running backs, the only thing JK can do to get the value that he's desiring, whatever it is for him to ball out this year. Like, there's nothing else that he can really do other than what he's doing. So, do your hold in. And, if he does it at the beginning training camp, maybe it'll be okay. But at some point, he's going to want to get in there because this is a new system. So to me, I just feel like we go through these so often that I know to be patient, and I know these things work out in the end. So I'm sure Dobbins, he's talking about how hard it is. So I get why it's hard on him. But for the rest of us looking in from the outside, this is just another contract negotiation. The Ravens do, dozens of them every year, and maybe more than dozens. And you just have to trust in the process and know that in the end, like 95% of these always get done, and maybe a few percent end in trades. But he's got, I just don't think a running back has trade value, especially given his injury history. So in the end, come September, I think he's going to be running in the backfield with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens.
Yeah, and you'd like to think that all of this is going to be a long afterthought at that point, too. And,
yeah.
It's funny. You just mentioned something that kind of reminded me of some jargon, some dialogue that we've had surrounding Patrick Queen, throughout this offseason in a similar sense, right? Control what you can control, PQ. Go out and ball out. And whether it's putting out tape for 31 other teams or perhaps, somehow the Ravens are able to pay you next offseason. That's all he can do right now, right? The fifth year option was declined, and all he can do is go out there and put his best foot forward. So similar situations. I know different in a little bit from the outside looking in and whatnot, but both of those guys you expect to be a part of this team, to be contributors to this team in 2023, and who knows about the beyond. There's a window, as Marlon Humphrey discussed last week. We'll get to that in just a bit, because I thought that was a strong message from, at this point, one of the more seasoned veterans on this team in Marlon Humphrey. And just for some added context, I got the Jeff Zaribek tweet in front of me from June 13th last week. He was told that JK's absence from practice was more precautionary for a minor soft tissue injury. So anyway, that's that.
Yeah,
let's move on to
injury. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure. With that, let's shift gears to some Odell Beckham Jr. conversation, because he met with the media for the first time since his signing extension last week. And there was plenty to discuss, including what Todd Monken had to say. Because remember, those two spent a season together in Cleveland, and so far so good from the perspective of Monk.
I was with him in 19, so do I see still a tremendous football player, a guy that can separate and route run and loves to play and brings a certain amount of energy and juice and experience. And then as we practice more together, as we get more together, now we try to fit it together, but he's always going to be crafty. He's always going to be able to find a way to separate. Where that ends up, X, Z, F, that's to be determined. But all that, is just trying to figure out where that fits, and that also with the other pieces, Zay, your tight ends, you brought in Nelson, getting Bate back, and we haven't even had him practice yet. So fitting that all together is really a big part of it, but it's fun to try and figure out how to fit it together. That you don't always have that.
So, Sarah, I was listening to an ESPN segment last week. I think it was with Orlovsky and Hasselbeck, two former NFL players, two former quarterbacks, if I'm not mistaken. And they were both sort of agreeing, led by Hasselbeck, that they don't expect Odell to be a high volume guy at this point in his career. That's what they feel. I don't know if that was more so about where he is at in his career and the uncertainty about where he's at coming off the ACL, or what might be needed in Baltimore. And we discussed this a little bit last week during the aftermath of Ian's conversation. But I wanted to revisit what Ian had to say about Odell, because remember, as you've mentioned, we've both mentioned, he's as plugged in as it gets. He's speaking to agents, he's speaking to players, he's speaking to organizational higher-ups, you name it. And so he's got a good feel, I think, throughout the time as an NFL insider for where players are. And he came right out of the gates talking about Odell when we asked about him. Here he is.
I think he's going to be really good. And, we haven't really seen Odell healthy in quite a long time. I mean, I remember, right before he signed with the Rams when he was a free agent. The reason teams weren't offering long-term deals are they knew his knee was not right. They knew his ACL essentially could re-tear at any moment. And it was a ticking time bomb, essentially. He knew it too. Knew his knee was going to tear at some point. It did during the Super Bowl. And obviously it took him off the field for a year. It's a very serious injury, but now he's healthy. So, I'm not worried about what happens in June. Like, this is all sort of whatever. I do think he's going to end up really good. And I will say this, like it took him a minute or so in LA, probably took him a month to figure it out. Once he figured it out, like he was he was really good. I mean, he was really good. Like, he was on his way to being, I thought the Super Bowl MVP before he tore his knee apart. So, like, whatever fans are expecting, I think that's probably what it's going to be.
So we're using our recording service for this show right now, and I'm just watching you smiling ear to ear as Ian's talking that up, right? Because we both know what that would mean for this offense, right? If he ends up being that high volume guy.
Well, so I guess a couple of things. So first, talking about his health, which is what he started out with, he was saying, like, I think he's going to be really good, and I think because he thinks he's healthy. So you and I obviously were not at the mandatory minicamp, and so I have been looking around, kind of looking at reporters who are there to kind of get their take to add to Ian. To me, it's like if you had got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 journalists all kind of observing similar things, then I think you can put stock in it. And Bobby, if Odell had even the slightest limp, or if he had some sort of, hitch in his run, you better believe that the ESPN, the Jameson Hensleys, or, some of these guys, they would point it out. I haven't seen a single reporter that watched him at minicamp last week have any sort of concern with that knee. Now, obviously, they're not hitting. That's going to take it to a whole other level. But with what he's asked to do right now, there's no concern with that. And then on top of it, like, I was listening to the Lounge podcast, and obviously I worked with those guys for years and years and years, and I really do respect, especially Garrett's opinion. I know, I think Ryan was out, so it was Garrett and Cliff Brown talking, and Garrett, doesn't actually ever talk down on somebody, but he also doesn't embellish when he does give compliments. And he was like, he was just like, his health was answered for me. He's like, I am no longer with like concerns about his knee after watching him this week. And Cliff was like, yeah, me neither. And so when you combine Ian saying that, then you got those two guys saying it, then there's no like ESPN, because Josina Anderson was there, national reporters were there. If there was anything off about OBJ, it would be headlines everywhere. And I'm talking like, health wise. So I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable with his health. And again, it's a different animal the further along we go, but I'm starting to feel comfortable with where we're at right now. Now, in terms of you bringing up like targets, well, I'm looking at some of his targets from past years, and they're right. There is no way. Like, his peak was 169 targets in 2016, had 158 before that, 2018, 124, 133, and then he started dealing with injuries, so they start to decrease there. The highest in recent years that we're looking at with Baltimore's play, Marquise Brown, who had 146 targets. That was in 2021. And I just don't know that the Ravens had a whole lot of, other places to go with the ball. And so I agree. I don't think he's going to be like this high volume in terms of like a ton of receptions, especially given I still think the Ravens are going to be running a lot. Lamar will take off if he needs to. He's got other weapons in Bateman. He's got the tight ends, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know that Odell's going to be this super high volume guy either, but I don't know, maybe somewhere between, maybe around 80 targets, maybe more. I don't know. There's just right now, it just depends on injuries, how many Mausers are going to be. But regardless of how many targets he gets, I think with the weapons already on this offense, I think he's going to be able to maximize the targets that he does get. And I think he's going to be able to maximize because of the attention he will, he's going to get from defenses. I think he's going to maximize touches for other people too. So I don't know what that tells you from a fantasy standpoint. All I know is from an offensive standpoint, I think he's really going to open things up. And when he does touch the ball, I think it's going to be very impactful.
I could see him becoming another dimension of like a Mark Andrews from a reliability standpoint, on a trust level standpoint with Lamar. And I'm talking about certain situational football, examples like, hey, you're 3rd and 7. It's the 4th quarter. You have got to move the chains here. You need 7 yards. And I'm going to trust this guy who it turns 31 in November, is a Super Bowl champion, to win his one-on-one battle on the outside. He's probably not going to be double teamed at this point in his career. And what has Mark Andrews done throughout Lamar's entire career? He has been that guy for them in those types of situations. If they can now have 2 of those types of players on their offensive roster, from a playmaking standpoint, that's only going to relieve the pressure, alleviate the pressure, whatever the word is, on Lamar's shoulders, right? So he doesn't have to always constantly wear that cape. That cape doesn't need to be flexed as much as it has in the past anymore,
Right.
You'd like to think. And so if OBJ can be that kind of dimension for them, and they can become, obviously they're going to be more than one-dimensional this year because of all the additions that they've made and this new commitment to passing and bringing in Monken and bringing in playmakers. But I think that would really, really behoove, that's going to benefit Lamar and hopefully the offense and hopefully the team, big picture.
Yeah. And so here's another thing that kind of surprised me, by the way, when I was listening to Garrett talk, is he and Cliff were talking about, and I'm bringing this up only because, again, so when you're at practice, you're not allowed, a reporter is not allowed to say who's playing with the 1s, 2s, or 3s. You can only say that if somebody at podium kind of confirms it. And so that's why when people asked about Saleh and then Harbaugh's like, oh yeah, he's looking good with the 1s, then okay, now you can finally say it. But it gives away too much information, so you're not allowed to say who's practicing with whom. However, you can kind of figure out who's practicing with whom with people's opinions. And so I'm giving that background because Garrett had said with Cliff, they both agreed. He was like, which was a little bit surprising just because I haven't been out there to see who's playing with whom, is Garrett and Cliff were like, we think the top 3 receivers come week 1, play 1. Now things could always change, but week 1, play 1. They see the top 3 receivers on the field outside OBJ and Bateman, assuming they're both healthy. And then in the slot, they had Duvernay over Zay Flowers. And so I was like, oh, okay. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but for them to say something like that, rather than to naturally think that the first round pick is going to be there, that tells me that that's maybe the pecking order right now, and maybe how well, Duvernay could be playing. So I thought that was interesting because in my mind, it's always been like, all right, he's a number 1 pick. He's going to be good to go. So maybe that could change over the course of training camp, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And then on top of it, and this comes back to target share, I mean, John Harbaugh himself compared, he said he had a picture in his basement, in his little arcade, a picture of Torrey Smith, Steve Smith, and Jacoby Jones, and kind of was inferring that maybe that's been the best wide receiver core since he's been coach. I would actually put when Anquan Bolden was with those two. Not that Steve Smith wasn't great, but that's just when they went to the Super Bowl and Steve wasn't in his prime. But then he's like, I don't know. Will these guys rival him? We'll see. But he put it in the conversation, which I thought was, that was surprising to me. And so bringing that back to target share, if Harbaugh himself is comparing this unit, again, he's not ready to say they're the best, but he was at least willing to have that conversation and bring up those guys and, how he remembers them. And it's like, okay, well, something promising is going on to where Harbaugh would even bring up that picture in his basement. And so if indeed this is feeling like a well-rounded wide receiver group, and even Duvernay still, in the top 3 conversation, and you haven't even added in Zay yet, then yeah, that's a lot of mouths to feed. So it comes back to you saying it may not be high volume for Odell because there's going to be a lot of guys who can contribute.
I wasn't sure how you were coming back around there, but I'm with you now, I totally get it, so it's going to be fascinating to watch unfold, but these are all good problems to have. This time last year, we were all sort of expecting Bateman to be that guy, but to have to be that guy. And the fact that he doesn't have to be anymore, maybe he could become that guy, but he doesn't have to be anymore. And hopefully that allows him to have a successful, between the ears at least, to start off his third season as he tries to stay healthy. Hopefully that sets him up for what will be a successful season health-wise. And along those same lines, certainly I know there's another guy at the top of that list that's hoping he can have that kind of season durability-wise, and that's Ronnie Stanley. And I thought one of the under-the-radar comments made from last week's mandatory minicamp was this, and it's Ronnie speaking to where he is right now physically.
So majority of my time, the past couple years have been spent on rehab, but 80% of that off-season time probably, and 20% on training. So been able to really put most of my time on training and building and getting stronger, getting more endurance, and just becoming an overall better athlete has been a big difference for me.
Is this as good as you felt, and how long would you say?
Yeah, I think this is as good as I felt since 2019, preseason 2020.
The Vault is sponsored by Oakley. Express your style and build a look that's made for you. And I know for me, I've been rocking the Prism Black polarized lenses this summer, and I'm loving them so far. Oakley's changing the game, and it's time to discover a whole new world of possibilities. Do you run? Do you golf? Maybe you train, or perhaps you just want to look like Lamar Action Jackson. If any of the above is true, you got to get yourself a pair of Oakleys today. Suited for everyday eyewear with frames and lenses allowing for an extension of self. Really, it's an expression of your personality. There's more than meets the eye. And here on The Vault, we're all about look good, feel good, perform good. And that's why Oakley is the perfect partner for us. And hey, since it's officially summer, you may want to upgrade your sunglasses game right now. So go visit Oakley.com to find yourself a pair today. Oakley offers Prism Lens technology, which is a proprietary technology to Oakley and available for everyday settings as well. If you're interested in learning more, head on over to Oakley.com and do your own research. And while you're there, get yourself a pair of everyday glasses that'll be sure to change your look for the better. When you wear Oakley, there really is more than meets the eye, but don't just trust Sarah and I. Try for yourself. I've worn a lot of sunglasses brands in my life, and I can confidently say that Oakley's not only the best looking, but the best quality out there. So head on over to Oakley.com for more information today. Sarah, I don't need to remind you what he was, not only to this team, but where he stacked up league-wide at left tackle in 2019.
Oh, yeah, no, all pro. Certainly one of the best, at least top 3 probably that year. And so it's funny. People ask me all the time, like, how are the Ravens going to be this year? And really for the last 3 years, I feel like Eric DeCosta has put together this amazing roster, but it always comes back to health. And so when you've got your left tackle, who's like your security guard, saying that hasn't felt this well since pre-2019 going into the season, man, that's a good sign. You've got Lamar in there, no injury issues. You've just got so many guys that are healthy, and the guys that aren't healthy, I think the least healthy is probably Patrick Ricard, and he's probably going to have a lesser role. I mean, oh my gosh, it's just like, if the Ravens can stay healthy, if Ronnie Stanley can be saying this stuff throughout the whole year, we all know that this is a playoff Super Bowl caliber team. Can this continue for Ronnie? Can it continue for Lamar? Can it continue for OBJ? Right now, I think that the Ravens are in an excellent position health-wise, and you just cross your fingers and pray that it can continue, because I want everybody to be talking the way Ronnie is right now throughout the year.
Yeah. Well, let's hope Rashad Bateman's able to talk about that as well. And one thing that we covered last week, thanks to Josina Anderson's one-on-one conversation that she had with Harbs at the Castle, was where Rashad is right now in his ongoing rehab and recovery process back from the Liz Frank. And here's Harbs explaining
Liz Frank per se is a different injury.
Where that's
the screws go in, the heals, and then the screws come out. And sometimes you have to deal with the screw coming out and how that heals. And that was really the issue with him. It's just a matter of putting some cortisone in there and helping that healing process when the screw came out. So it's not a structural issue at all. It is an issue of just comfort and making sure it's right for training camp.
So not to beat a dead horse, I know we touched on this a little bit last week, but I think the comparison that I was trying to make is when Marquise Brown came into the league with the screws in his foot out of Oklahoma. And while he had flashes his rookie year, he was limited because of those screws, like literally had metal in his foot. The fact that Bate now, we're more than halfway through June, all of July, all of August, a week or two before the season starts in September. He's got a nice chunk of time now to continue to rehab, to continue to strengthen that foot. And the screws won't even hopefully be a topic of conversation that's going to give him, you'd hope, immense comfort and, hopefully explosiveness for his sake.
Yeah, once I heard that like it was the screws that came out that caused the discomfort, like the screws coming out at this period of time, like I feel it makes me feel really good for Bate. I think that him on the schedule that he's on with those coming out, something, there could always be a setback or something throughout this time, but I'm feeling pretty good about him. I want him to have a breakout season. And health is going to be the, key factor of that. But Bobby, think about this offense with OBJ and the tight ends and then Bateman breaks out. And then Bateman breaks out with this offense that you have. If Ronnie's healthy, it would just transform this. It would transform this offense even to another level. So I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for health. I'm rooting for him to break out. I'm rooting for him to become the wide receiver one everybody predicted he would be coming out of the draft. So let's just hope that this is like a good sign that these are already out and that he can just hit the season running and then just like ramp up throughout it so that he hits a peak just at the right time. Because with the other receivers on this team, if he becomes what we all thought he can become, it's just going to make this offense that much better.
A couple other notes that probably didn't get a ton of buzz within the media or, headlines wise, but Kevin Zeitler, who has just been a stabilizing force at right guard over the last couple seasons, he has no plans or intentions of retiring anytime soon. He is entering the final year of that 3-year deal he signed a couple years ago. Certainly downplay the significance of where he is right now. There were some reports out there last week from the national insiders like Adam Schefter that he says he's reportedly seeking a new deal. But in classic Zeitler fashion, Sarah, he downplayed it and said that, it's more important that he is participating, that he's involved in these, not only OTAs, but also I don't think he really was at OTAs this year, if I'm not mistaken, or if he was, he wasn't around or active much, but he was at mandatory minicamp, and that just speaks to his professionalism. And the guy's he's an impressive human being.
His answer actually reminded me a lot of Lamar from last year, where he was like, yeah, I want a new deal, but I'm here because I couldn't do this to my teammates. That is exactly what Lamar said last year when everybody was like, what are you doing? Why are you even stepping foot on the field before you get a contract? And he was like, negotiating was, that's separate from this. I'm not going to, he's like, I love the game too much and I love my teammates too much to do that to them. And then when Zeitler said it, I was like, that's exactly what Lamar said. And they both backed it up by being there when it was risky for them to be there. So I thought that was, a great response from Zeitler.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of guard, again, too early to really dive into this in detail. There will be a competition at left guard for starting left guard for back-to-back seasons now. We know that Ben Powers emerged from the pack last year, really due to Ben Cleveland getting a late start because of his inability to pass the conditioning test for those first few days of camp or the offseason or whatever. But right now, the topic of conversation is whether or not the rookie out of Oregon, Big Sala, has a potential chance to be a contender in this competition, Sarah, because he was running with the ones, as they say. So he was getting first team reps last week. We know that guys like the aforementioned Ben Cleveland and the veteran John Simpson are all going to be in the mix. You'd have to think that Patrick McCarry's probably a bit too reliable just in terms of his versatility, especially as a swing tackle to be in consideration there. But you better believe he's capable of doing it. So that's probably from a positional battle standpoint, things to be looking out for ahead of camp. I think we'd probably have that, that position circled.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what others there are. I mean, maybe at cornerback on the other side of the ball, but it seems like the Ravens have plenty of options there between Cleveland, Sala, and John Simpson. I feel like when Ben Powers won it, like nobody, it wasn't like, oh yeah, for sure Ben Powers. I don't remember like reporters being like, oh, he's a stud, he's got this, it's locked up. You know what I mean? It was just like he steadily got better and better and better. And so it just sounds like from reports coming out of there that John Simpson looks pretty solid. I haven't really heard anything that Cleveland looks solid. But between Sala and John Simpson, it seems like they have options there. And really, I mean, the offensive line seems to be in good shape as long as one of those step up at left guard, as long as like there's not like a sudden drop off with the vets on the right side, right? So Moses isn't like somebody you're writing home about, but certainly has been consistent and been pretty solid over there. Zeitler, I just don't feel like his he's been dropping off. So you just hope that the vets don't, lose too much as they continue to get older. And if that doesn't happen, if they can continue not to have like a, fight off father time, you're feeling pretty good about the offensive line.
Here's Marlon Humphrey's message that I referenced earlier on. I think this is a refreshing sort of tone that he uses here, an intensity of focus that, sure, like we don't get to see a ton of that because he's playful during his media obligations. That doesn't mean he doesn't, turn on that switch. Of course he turns on this switch. He's a Pro Bowl caliber cornerback. But during his media press conference last week, you saw a little bit of a different side. Some of that when the flip is on, when the switch is on, he showed that a little bit, and it resonated with me.
Actually, what motivated me and Lamar were talking in the training room the other day, but just talking about, a quick message. Just, I think to win a Super Bowl, you got to put a lot of time and effort in. And I think, while we got in some good work, OTAs, minicamp, you got this big break. Whether it's you want to hang out with your dog a lot, want to hang out with your girl a lot, want to hang out with this, try to do as much of that as you can, because when we come back, we want everybody to be putting as much time into football as you can. The off seasons are long, plenty of time, but when you don't, these days, these practices, being in the NFL, it's a very short span compared to the rest of your life. So I know that's one of the things that I plan on, making different in this season, putting as much time as I can than I ever have before. So, I think if we can all echo that, be on the same, one accord, I think special things can happen with this team.
The window is here and now, partner.
The window is here and now. Now's the time. And this is also like we saw pictures of Steve Bisciotti at camp. I know it was like, his golf cart talking to Lamar, which, by the way, how quickly things can change in a couple months. How it just seems like a blink of an eye that we were talking about, the report that, Bisciotti and
was seething.
Bisciotti, Lamar and
seething.
the NFLPA and the seething and all those reports. And then all of a sudden we see a picture of Bisciotti and Lamar sitting in a golf cart looking like, they're pretty chummy. And, Marlon said that he had talked to Steve, for, love life advice, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm bringing Steve up because it's like people coming in there to give a message, because this time off it always seems like during this time off, and it's not just with the Ravens, it's just throughout it, when you've got idle time, you can get yourself in trouble, and so you just want to make sure, Steve's out there preaching to make good decisions over this time off. Marlon Humphrey's like, live it up. But, remember, this is a short time of our lives. Was it last year at this time, Bobby, that we lost Ferguson? Or was that 2 years ago?
We lost Jalen and Tony and Goose on the same day last June. So it's coming up on a year.
Yeah. So, you just hope that, these guys get some rest as they need. Because, the pressure that is on after this, I don't even know, man, if people understand the pressure cooker that these guys are under once the season starts, the expectations that are there. And so I said this last time, I love Marlon Humphrey's message. It's essentially a message of sacrifice. And I didn't say this last time, but, sacrifice comes from a Latin root or a Latin word to mean to transform. And so you want to transform to greatness. And when you're great, you let go of like little things that don't really matter, and you let go of like these little inconveniences in order to become great. And so that's what he was preaching there, like, listen, when we get back at this, it's all football. It's all football because we feel like we can win a Super Bowl. And so, little things of like, going out on the town or all that kind of stuff, do it to a certain degree while you're home. But when we get back, let go of that stuff because it's time to be great.
Yeah. Well said. And just to be clear too, I wanted to make sure I had the date correct. June 22nd, that's this Thursday, marks the 1 year anniversary of both Tony and Jalen, leaving us. And I this is fresh in my mind. We're recording this on Father's Day. So of course, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, both Vault listeners and within the Ravens community at large. Sammy Saragusa, which is one of Tony's daughters, only daughter, if I'm not mistaken. She and I follow each other on Instagram, and I noticed that they took a family trip. They're currently in Europe right now. And it made me think, like, what my best friend from home lost his father at an early age. We were in high school. And of course, he's always going to be with us. One thing I've noticed from a coping mechanism, their family always does something today or this weekend. Like they go somewhere, they plan a trip, they're all together. And it really hit me that all the Saragusas decided to go and honor their late father by going on a trip. And they're quite literally doing things that were either on his bucket list or that he just enjoyed. And I just thought it was so, it was spiritual, but it was also meaningful to them. And if you have a couple seconds today, just say a prayer for obviously the Saragusas and every family out there who kind of had to endure this weekend without, a father figure in their life, because obviously, Sarah, in your household, he's everything to you guys. So I know a lot of folks were thinking about that this weekend.
Speaking of prayers, how about a prayer for Ray Lewis?
That was kind of the segue. Yeah.
Yeah. That's tough. I'm sure most people listening know that he lost his son over the weekend or late last week, Ray Lewis III. And I know Ray Lewis. I know that he has a lot of faith, and I know that he believes in the power of prayer. And so I know that that's something that that I'm sure he's doing a lot of, and that he would appreciate, in his life. So I just, for that to happen, again, right before Father's Day. And listen, I know I've got 30 nieces and nephews. Well, I guess if you put my kids into it, my parents have about 30 grandkids. And and you just never know. I mean, I've just seen my siblings, all of them want to be the best mothers and fathers. And at some point, kids just they have the life of their own, and you never know how it's going to turn out. And if your kids aren't happy, or if a tragedy happens, you look at yourself and you're like, was I a good mom, or was I a good dad? And it wouldn't surprise me, because Ray Lewis is in order to become great, you're always looking at, what can I do better? And what can I do to make, to be great? And I know he didn't just want to be a great football player. I know he wanted to be a great dad and a great everything that he does. He wants to be great. And I'm sure it's a temptation when things go wrong to be like, what did I do wrong? How could I have done something more? How could I have helped, avoid a tragedy or whatever? And so I just hope that Ray has enough strength to know that he's the father that, I'm sure he's great at that too. And this isn't, hopefully I'm hoping he's not doubting himself, and that he's just being a great father to the rest of his kids and all those that are mourning Ray Lewis III's life. And so I just pray that he can be strengthened during this time, and that the family can be strengthened during this time, that they can come together and do what the Saragooses are doing, which is celebrating their dad, celebrating a life by going to the places that they knew that he enjoyed to do. And so, because all you can do is try to be strong and try to move forward and try to be helpful and kind and loving and passionate and all those things. And so that's tough to do when tragedy hits. And so I just pray that they can find the strength to keep moving forward and find a way to celebrate Ray Lewis III's life.
Yeah, well said. He left us far, far too soon. 28 years old. Of course, played cornerback at his father's alma mater for a couple seasons, University of Miami, before transferring to Coastal Carolina back in 2015, and then ended up finishing his career at Virginia Union. But again, Ray Lewis III, we won't get into the details, but there were some reports out there that he died of a suspected overdose from some credible national sources. So we'll leave it at that. We're obviously praying for Ray. We're praying for his family, and we ask you to do the same as well. In Baltimore and beyond here. So with that, partner, we got somewhat of a chill week. I mean, there's not a ton on the docket right now in terms of media stuff from the team. Obviously for the next month or so, we're just going to be gearing up for training camp and stuff, and hoping that, obviously no off the field stuff happens, right? If the off the field stuff tends to happen either on bye week and this stretch that we're about to enter into, so you kind of got to hope and cross your fingers for, good, solid fortune in that regard. But hopefully we'll get the training camp dates coming up here soon, so we can start to plan out a few of some logistical stuff that we have and some ideas that we have for content. But with that, another week beginning up in June, and we'll see what it brings.
Yeah. And, I didn't get a chance to slip this in earlier before we went into more of the Father's Day stuff and off the field stuff. Just one other thought on the football side before we go here. I am hearing so much good stuff about David Ojabo, and that he plays even as a second-year guy who didn't get to play a full rookie year, that he's approaching practice like he's like this vet, so much swagger, so much confidence, like he knows what he's doing, so he can play without thinking. If he can be the first-round pick that everybody was predicting he would be before he got injured, we'll see what happens with Justin Houston. You know what I mean? This is a massive year for both Ojabo and Owe. Those two are the future. And I'm so happy that I'm hearing fabulous things about Ojabo. And if he is that good, who knows if they need a Justin Houston. We're all expecting the Ravens to sign him or some sort of veteran, but it's kind of like what we've been saying at cornerback, that once the Ravens get a look at these guys, do they need to go get a veteran? And so if you see them get a veteran, it's probably like, we're not feeling so good about these young guys. Now, either way, they could still sign Justin. Maybe they need more, I was about to say bodies, but bodies usually a word you say for a camp guy. He's obviously more than that, but maybe you do need more depth or whatnot. But I think it's very, very good news that everywhere I turn, people are talking about how good Ojabo looks. So again, the pads are not on, but there's somebody talk about Bateman needing a breakout year. If Owe and Ojabo have breakout years, when you already have a stud inside linebacker duo and you have a stud safety duo with Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton, then oh my goodness, if you compare that with two bookends on the line, that would be huge. So again, it's June. We don't want to get too excited, but I'm happy to hear all these great reports on Ojabo. Sorry to slip that in at the end there, but I just remembered it as we were about to finish.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. I mean, I hope it didn't get lost sort of in the shuffle last week because the Ravens took a flyer on him a year ago. And if it weren't for the torn Achilles, all right, then, the infamous torn Achilles at the Michigan Pro Day, the dude was projected out to be a surefire first-round pick. So what I mean by a flyer is that the Ravens knew that the first year was going to be a wash. Now, did he play a little bit at the end? Yeah, he did. Did he flash a little bit? Yeah, he flashed just a little bit. But they took a flyer in the sense that, all right, we're going to essentially invest in David with this mid-round selection. But come 2023 fall, it's on, and that time's coming. And so hopefully, that investment will start to pay off now. We'll start to see the ROI, if you will, come 2023 for David. So anyway, we will stick a pin in at that.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but not only a surefire first-round pick, but the Ravens were picking at 14, and everybody's like, is he even going to be there by the time the Ravens get to number 14?
Right.
So it wasn't like a number 32 pick. This was like top half of the draft kind of pick.
No, that's an important that's an important aspect of it. Like, it wasn't just anywhere in the first round. This dude was projected out to be, say, top 15, top 10. So I think we got to keep that in mind. And hopefully he's coming off this Achilles, much like Tyus Bowser did, a year ago, guns blazing, and the explosiveness is there. And obviously he's a lot younger than Tyus. So hopefully that'll come to fruition for him. But with that, we will be back in Morning Vault format on Tuesday. And of course, as always, if you're interested in supporting what we're building, you can do so by checking out what we're offering on patreon.com/RavensVault podcast. We can be reached by email at BaltimoreRavensVault@gmail.com. And for my co-host and partner, Sarah Ellison, I'm Bobby Trossett signing off. Thanks for joining us on this episode Inside the Vault.